Rome, in the year 120 after Christ. A wealthy daughter, considered a disgrace. A slave broken by wars. A father who believed he could control destiny. But nothing, absolutely nothing, went as he expected. Marcus Flavius Severus, Roman senator, observes his own daughter like one observes an unsolvable problem. Claudia was not what Rome expected from a young noblewoman, and much less what he expected from an heir. She was obese, refusing to follow the beauty standards that turned other girls into starving shadows of themselves. She was stubborn, rejecting every suitor he dragged to her door. And worse still, she was far too intelligent for her own good, quoting philosophers and challenging his decisions before important senators. She shamed him, constantly, publicly, and today he decided this would end. He summoned one of his slaves, Dryas, a young and strong man, captured during the wars in Judea, who carried the silence of the defeated, and made an announcement that shocked the entire household. Claudia would be handed over to Dryas, not as a wife, as property. She would live as a slave, serving the one she had always treated with a kindness that Marcus considered weakness. It would be a lesson in humility, a complete breaking of her proud spirit. At least, that's what Marcus believed. But what happened in the following months surprised everyone, especially the senator himself. This is the story of how a cruel punishment transformed into something no one expected, and how the people who should have been enemies found the only thing Rome could never control. Claudia Flavia Severa was born in the year 97 after Christ into one of Rome's oldest families. Her mother, Livia, died bringing her into the world, and Marcus never forgave his daughter for that. He wanted sons, heirs who would carry his name in the legions, in the Senate, in the temples. Instead, he had a girl, and every aspect of her seemed designed to disappoint him. From a young age, Claudia demonstrated a voracious appetite, not just for food, for knowledge, for debate, for everything Roman society said girls should not desire. She ate without shame while other young noble women delicately picked at their meals. At 10 years old, she was already visibly heavier. At 15, undeniably obese by Roman standards. Her body was round, soft, completely outside the ideals that exalted thinness and feminine fragility. Marcus tried everything. Diets supervised by physicians, forced exercises, punitive fasts that left her weak and dizzy. Nothing worked. Claudia simply found ways to eat. And worse than her appearance was her personality. She was intelligent, terribly intelligent. She had taught herself to read, devoured philosophy scrolls from her father's library. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus. She absorbed everything and then dared to debate with male tutors, frequently winning arguments with sharp logic. When Marcus organized banquets, Claudia was a constant source of embarrassment. She refused to remain silently in the women's quarters, appeared in the banquet hall, participated in conversations about politics, corrected important men when they said something factually incorrect. The guests laughed behind Marcus's back. How could he not control a mere daughter? But the situation became unbearable when Claudia reached marriageable age. Marcus sought suitors, men from good families willing to overlook her appearance in exchange for a generous dowry. Claudia rejected them all. The first was intellectually limited. The second smelled of rancid garlic. The third clearly kept a slave boy for impure purposes. Each rejection was a public humiliation, and each one deepened Marcus's resentment. Claudia knew she disappointed her father. Part of her cared, desired his approval, but a larger part, the part that had read about philosophers who argued that wisdom was more valuable than beauty, refused to diminish herself. She didn't want to be property of some mediocre man, wanted to live on her own terms. And in 2nd century Rome, that was impossible for a woman. Meanwhile, in another part of the same villa lived Dryas, 25 years old, born free in Jerusalem, captured at 18 during a revolt against Rome. His entire family was destroyed. He watched his father be executed, his mother and sisters sold, and he was bought by Marcus Severus. For 7 years, Dryas had been a model of obedience, worked in the fields, in the vineyards, in the stables, never complained, kept his head down. But inside him, there was a fire that never extinguished, hatred for the Romans, contempt for masters like Marcus, and a desire for freedom he knew he would probably never achieve. Darius had seen Claudia occasionally. She was hard to miss, not just because of her appearance, but because of her presence. He had witnessed some of her debates. Once, hidden behind a column while serving wine, he heard her argue that slavery was morally indefensible, citing Stoic principles about universal humanity. Marcus sent her away furiously, but Darius never forgot. A Roman woman, born into extreme privilege, arguing for his humanity. In early June of the year 120 after Christ, everything changed. Marcus had arranged another suitor, a wealthy widower of 52 years seeking a young wife to give him more heirs. Claudia rejected him during the presentation banquet itself, pointed out that he already had 6 children, and she had no interest in being an incubator. The widower left offended, and Marcus finally exploded. He dragged Claudia to his private study, and there, with a voice trembling from years of contained rage, announced his decision. She didn't appreciate her privileged position, treated slaves with more respect than suitors. Then she would live like them, would be handed over to Darius, would live in his miserable quarters, eat his simple food, serve his needs, and when she finally begged to return, when she was broken and humble, perhaps he would reconsider. Claudia remained silent, not from the threat of physical discomfort, but from the casual cruelty of using another human being as a tool to punish her. But she knew her father, and a stubborn part of her decided she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of begging. "Very well," she said calmly. "If that's what you wish." Marcus expected tears. Please. Promises to change. What he received was calm acceptance. This made him even angrier. But he had publicly announced his plan. Now he couldn't back down. So the next morning, Claudia was escorted by guards to the slave quarters. Darius was informed by a malicious supervisor who clearly expected violence. The senator's daughter would be his responsibility. She would sleep in his quarters, eat his food, and he should ensure she learned her lesson. The supervisor winked, insinuating that Darius had freedom to treat her as he wished. When Claudia arrived, Darius immediately saw the carefully hidden fear in her eyes. She disguised it with proud posture, chin raised, but he recognized fear. He had seen it in water reflections during his first months as a slave. She was terrified, rightfully so. A Roman noblewoman, completely vulnerable, handed over to a slave who had every reason to hate everything she represented. Darius looked at her for a long moment, and then spoke the first direct words they had ever exchanged. "You can have the mattress. I'll sleep on the floor." Claudia blinked, confused. "What? The mattress?" he repeated, pointing to the only piece of furniture besides a broken table. "It's not much, but it's better than cold stone. But where will you sleep?" Darius shrugged. "I've slept in worse places," and he left before she could respond, leaving Claudia alone, completely disoriented. She had prepared for humiliation, possibly violence. Instead, she received something she never expected: basic kindness. The first days were strangely quiet. Darius worked from dawn to dusk. Claudia, with nothing to do, explored the slave quarters, observed others working, and slowly began to understand how these people lived. The food was basic: hard bread, watery porridge, occasionally vegetables. There were no luxuries, no privacy. Dirty bodies crowded into tight spaces. And yet, there was humanity. Slaves shared meager portions with the sick, laughed at jokes, sang songs quietly. Claudia had always believed abstractly that slaves were humans who deserved dignity. But there was a difference between believing philosophically and witnessing reality. These weren't abstract concepts. They were people, with stories, with dreams, with loves and fears, and she was beginning to truly see them for the first time. In the evenings, when Darius returned, he practically collapsed from exhaustion. Claudia tried to converse, but he responded in monosyllables, not from rudeness, but because he was too exhausted to form complete sentences. He ate in silence, checked if she had what she needed, and then lay on the floor and fell asleep immediately. On the 5th night, Claudia couldn't take it anymore. When Darius returned, she had made a bed on the floor for herself. "You work all day," she said firmly. "You need the mattress more than I do." They argued. finally reached a compromise. Both would sleep on the mattress, one at each end, with separate blankets. It was strange, uncomfortable, completely inappropriate, but it was practical. As the weeks passed, barriers began to crumble. Claudia asked questions about Darius's life, about Jerusalem, about his family. At first, he resisted, but her genuine curiosity was hard to ignore. And slowly, in whispered nighttime conversations, he began to share about his father, a respected merchant, about his mother, who made the best bread, about his twin sisters who loved to dance, about the day Roman legionaries destroyed everything. Claudia listened with tears rolling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for what my people did to yours." Darius was surprised. "It wasn't you who did it. You weren't even born. But I benefit from it," she insisted. "I live in luxury built on the suffering of people like you. How can I not be responsible?" These conversations changed something between them. The resentment Darius expected to feel simply didn't materialize. She wasn't like other Roman nobles. She questioned everything, including the foundations of her own society. And Claudia discovered that Darius was nothing like she had imagined. He was educated. His family had valued learning. He could read Hebrew and Greek, understood philosophy, architecture, commerce. He was a complete person who had been reduced to a tool. In the second month, something unexpected happened. Claudia began to work, not because she was forced, but because she couldn't bear to remain idle while Darius and others worked to exhaustion. She started helping in the kitchens, peeling vegetables, carrying water. Other slaves were shocked, but she insisted, and slowly they accepted her, not as mistress, but as someone who worked alongside them. Physical work was harder than Claudia had ever imagined. Her body, unaccustomed, ached constantly. Her hands developed blisters that burst and bled. But there was something liberating. For the first time, she felt she was genuinely contributing, not just existing as a problematic ornament. Darius observed her transformation with something resembling admiration. She could have spent these months complaining. Instead, she chose to live as they lived. One evening, after a difficult day, they were sitting outside, looking at the stars. "Why do you do this?" Darius asked abruptly. "Do what? Work? You could simply wait for your father to change his mind, but you choose to work like us." Claudia thought for a long moment. "I spent my life arguing that all people are fundamentally equal, but they were just words, abstract philosophy. Now I'm living it, and it's different to live something than to just believe in it." Darius nodded slowly. "And what have you learned?" "That I was right in theory, but didn't understand the cost," she replied quietly. "It's easy to have principles when you're comfortable. Much harder when you feel it in your own flesh." That conversation marked a change. They were no longer borrowed mistress and forced slave. They were becoming friends, true friends, in a way that transcended social positions. They talked about everything: philosophy, religion, politics, dreams. Darius spoke about the fantasy of seeing Jerusalem free. Claudia shared the desire to live a life that mattered. And at some point during the third month, friendship began to transform into something more. Neither Claudia nor Darius were prepared. It was unthinkable. She was a free woman, Roman, from a senatorial family. He was a slave, foreigner, without rights. A relationship was literally illegal. If discovered, he would be executed. But feelings don't follow social laws. They spent every moment together, sharing intimate space, deep conversations, mutual vulnerability. It was almost inevitable. Claudia realized it first. She woke one morning and her first awareness was of Darius sleeping inches from her. Her heart accelerated in a way that had nothing to do with fear. It took weeks to fully understand. And when she understood, she was terrified. Because this complicated everything. Darius realized it when he began counting the hours until he could return. Not because he was tired, but because it meant seeing Claudia, hearing her voice, seeing her smile. And when he realized it, he hated himself, because he had no right. She was so far above him that the idea was ridiculous. And more so, she was there as punishment. She would eventually return, and he would remain a slave until death. The tension grew. Conversations became charged, meaningful silences. And then, one evening at the end of the third month, everything exploded. They had argued about something trivial. Claudia insisting she could carry more water, Darius arguing she would hurt herself. The argument escalated, and suddenly, Claudia shouted, "Why do you care so much? I'm just a burden to you, admit it." Darius remained completely motionless, and then, with a low and intense voice she had never heard, he responded, "You think you're a burden? You, who treats every slave here with more dignity than your own father ever showed, who works until your hands bleed because you refuse to remain idle while others suffer, who listens to my stories and cries for people you never knew, a burden." He stopped abruptly, realizing he was about to say something irreversible. "I'm what?" Claudia whispered, heart pounding. Darius looked away. "Nothing. Forget it." "No," she insisted, moving closer. "Say it, please." He closed his eyes. "You're the first good thing that's happened to me in 7 years, and I wake up every day afraid it's the day you'll leave." The silence that followed was absolute, and then Claudia did something that would change both their lives. She crossed a small distance and kissed him. For a moment, Darius remained frozen in shock, and then he pulled her close, kissing her back with all the repressed emotion of months. When they separated, both were trembling. "This is madness," Darius whispered. "I know," Claudia responded. "If we're discovered, you'll be killed." "Then why?" "Because for the first time in my life," Claudia said, holding his face, "I feel truly seen, truly valued, not by my family, but for who I really am. And I'm not going to give this up. I'm not going to give you up." In the following months, they lived in a secret bubble. Publicly, they maintained appropriate distance. Privately, they were simply Claudia and Darius, two humans who had found each other against all odds. They talked until dawn, laughed together, planned impossible futures, and then, at the beginning of the 6th month, something forced everything to a critical point. Marcus Severus, tired of his failed experiment, decided to visit her personally. He appeared at the slave quarters one afternoon, expecting to find Claudia broken, humiliated, ready to accept any marriage. Instead, he found her in the fields, working alongside other slaves, harvesting grapes. She was tan from the sun, calloused hands, body visibly thinner from physical work, and she was laughing, genuinely laughing at something another slave had said. Marcus was shocked. This wasn't the expected reaction. He called her, ordering her to come immediately. Claudia obeyed, without hurry. When she stood before him, dirty and sweaty, he barely recognized her. "Are you ready to return?" he asked coldly. "To accept the marriage I'll arrange?" Claudia looked at him for a long moment, and then, to his absolute horror, she responded, "No." Pause. "What?" "No," she repeated more firmly. "I won't return, and I won't accept any arranged marriage." Marcus turned red with fury. "You have no choice. You're my daughter, my property." "Then I suppose I'll stay here," Claudia responded calmly, "because I've discovered I prefer to live honestly as a slave than dishonestly as your daughter." It was such a direct insult that Marcus almost struck her. But there were witnesses. "You'll regret this," he spat. "I'll give you 1 more month, and then, if you still refuse, I'll arrange your marriage anyway. You'll be dragged to the altar in chains if necessary." He left in fury, leaving Claudia trembling, but standing. That night, she and Darius faced reality. They had lived in a bubble, but bubbles burst. "You should go back," Darius said miserably. "Accept a marriage. At least you'll be safe." "I don't want safety if it means living without you," Claudia responded. "Then we'll flee," Darius suggested desperately. "There are ships in Ostia. We can go to Egypt, Greece." "As fugitive slaves?" Claudia asked gently. "They'd hunt us. You'd be crucified." "No. There has to be another way." They tried to devise a plan, but every option seemed impossible. Claudia had no rights to refuse marriage, and Darius was property. The solution came from an unexpected source. An older slave woman, Helena, sought out Claudia. "There is a way," she said quietly, "but it will require great courage." She explained that there was an ancient law allowing Roman citizens to voluntarily renounce their citizenship. It was almost never invoked because it meant giving up all rights. But if Claudia did it, her father would no longer have legal authority over her. "You'd technically become stateless," Helena explained. without rights, without protection, but also without obligations. And then she looked significantly at Darius. Slaves who gain freedom can marry whom they choose. The implication was clear. If Claudia renounced citizenship and Darius gained freedom, they could technically marry. It would be a difficult life, but it would be theirs. Claudia and Darius discussed wildly. It was insane. It required Claudia to give up everything. And there was still the question of how Darius would gain freedom. But as they talked, Claudia remembered something. She had money set aside, a wedding gift from her grandmother that was under a trustee's control, not her father's. If she could access it, she could buy Darius's freedom. The plan was risky. Claudia would have to leave the quarters, go to the city, contact the trustee, access the funds, and return before Marcus discovered, and then formally renounce citizenship. It was completely crazy, and they decided to do exactly that. 3 days later, on a quiet morning, Claudia left the villa. She wore simple clothes, looked like a common servant. It took 2 days to complete the necessary transactions. The trustee was shocked, but legally couldn't refuse. She formally purchased Darius's freedom, and then, before official witnesses, renounced Roman citizenship. When she returned 3 days later, she went directly to Darius in the fields. She carried the official papers of his freedom. "You're free," she said, tears rolling. "You're free, Darius." He looked at the documents, unable to process it. After 7 years as a slave, freedom seemed to abstract a concept. But it was real, officially documented. He was no longer Marcus Severus's property. The news spread like fire, and Marcus, when he learned, became apoplectic. He confronted Claudia, demanding to know what she had done. She explained calmly. She was no longer his daughter, not legally. She had renounced citizenship, and Darius was no longer his slave. He was a free man. "You destroyed everything," Marcus shouted. "Your future, your name, your family. For a slave, a Jew? For love," Claudia corrected calmly. "Something you never understood." Marcus formally disinherited her that day, ordered her to leave his properties immediately. She obeyed, without a tear. Darius went with her, free for the first time in 7 years. They left together, carrying only what they could, leaving behind the only world Claudia had ever known. The life that followed wasn't easy. They settled in a port city, far from Rome. Claudia, without connections, discovered no one would hire her. Darius, marked as a former slave, faced constant discrimination. But they worked together. He as a carpenter, she as a scribe. They earned little, lived simply, but they were happy in ways Claudia had never been in her luxurious villa. 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony, without family, but it didn't matter. They had chosen each other over everything else. The following year, Claudia gave birth to a daughter. They named her Livia, after Claudia's mother. And when Darius held that small creature, a being who was half him and half the woman he loved, a being who was born free, he cried for the first time since his capture. Marcus Severus died 4 years later, a bitter man who never spoke of his daughter again. He left his fortune to distant relatives he barely knew. And Claudia, when she learned, felt only emptiness. Not sadness, not relief, just recognition that they had been strangers who shared blood but never understood each other. Claudia and Darius lived 42 more years together. They had 3 more children, built a modest but meaningful life, and when they died, days apart, they were buried side by side, without monuments, without grand eulogies, just 2 people who had found each other against all odds and chosen love over social convenience. Their story was preserved in letters their descendants kept, and centuries later, those letters were discovered by fascinated historians. A wealthy woman who gave up everything, a slave who found freedom through love, and a father who thought he was teaching a lesson in humility, but accidentally created the conditions for the most subversive thing possible. Genuine human connection that completely transcended social hierarchies. Marcus had tried to break Claudia's spirit by handing her to a slave. Instead, she discovered that social hierarchies were artificial constructs that crumbled before shared humanity. He tried to teach her the value of privilege. She learned the value of dignity. He expected her to return begging. She chose a difficult life with real meaning. And Darius, who had been reduced to a tool, discovered through Claudia that his humanity could never truly be taken. He regained not just legal freedom, but something deeper, the capacity to see himself as more than a victim. He was a man capable of loving and being loved, of building a life, of creating a family. And that revelation was perhaps the deepest liberation of all. The story of Claudia and Darius remains as testimony to something fundamental about human nature. That real connections transcend social constructs, that love can flourish in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes punishments meant to break us end up freeing us in ways we never imagined. Marcus tried to teach a lesson of cruelty, but the lesson that was truly taught was about the courage to live authentically, to value people over positions, to choose genuine love over empty comfort. In ancient Rome, where slavery was the economic foundation and social hierarchies were treated as natural, Claudia and Darius proved there was another way to live, based not on where one was born, but on who one chose to be. And though their story is just one among millions, it's important precisely because it shows that even in the most oppressive systems, individual humanity can create moments of transcendence. They didn't change the world, they didn't overthrow slavery, but they created a small space where the people could be completely human with each other. And sometimes that's revolution enough. Marcus thought he was handing his daughter to a slave, not knowing he was handing her to her own freedom. And Claudia, who was born wealthy, died free,